Okay, guys, welcome back. We are getting into Chapter 14, Section 2, Silver and Global Commerce. And lucky for you guys, this section is not very long. But some things to think about before we really get started. Like the Atlantic system, which we will get into, I believe, in Section 3, trade in silver was global commerce that touched on the Americas, Europe, and especially East Asia. The global silver trade touches on multiple course themes, so pay very close attention to what's going on with the global silver trade, because the labor systems of the Spanish Andean mines, the political policies of the Ming Dynasty, and the economic reach of Europeans all played a role in the silver trade. That's why it's important. Labor systems of the Spanish Andes, the political policies of the Ming Dynasty in China, and the economic reach of those Europeans. All very important with the global silver trade. All right, here we go. Okay, let's start here, silver and global commerce. So the silver trade was even more important than the spice trade in creating a global exchange network. Enormous silver deposits were discovered in both Bolivia and Japan. Probably about the mid-16th century, 1500s. And in the early modern period, Spanish America produced approximately 85% of the world's silver. Whoa. Yeah, they made some cash. Yeah. So these silver deposits discovered in Japan and, like I said, Bolivia. And this really set in motion a whole new and dynamic phase in world economic history with the discovery of those silver deposits. That's why it's very important. China's economy, it was huge, and they had a growing demand for silver. In the 1570s, the Chinese government consolidated taxes into a single tax to be paid in silver. So what happens when the demand goes up? The value goes up. It skyrocketed. And foreigners with silver could finally purchase more Chinese products than they were able to before. So now the Europeans, who before didn't have any good products, were trading, didn't have the money to get those Asian products. Now, once they have a large amount of silver, they can really start purchasing those Chinese products, more so than ever before. And so silver from the Andes came to dominate global trade. Some estimate, like I said, about 85% came from the Spanish American colonies. And a Spanish piece of 8 was a standard coin. Here we go. Was a standard coin that could be used around the world. Much of Spain's silver flowed west to Manila, which is in the Philippines, where it was then spent on Chinese goods and then made its way into China proper. And silver then went toward Europe, was frequently spent on Asian imports. So you can see how it really encompasses the gold here. And the government that centralized the tax for, to be paid in silver, that just dramatically increased the demand for that precious metal, especially, in China. And so we see a silver drain to Asia. And so the bulk of the world's silver supply ended up in China. Most of it actually reached other parts of Asia. But the Spanish silver brought to Europe was used to buy those Asian goods. Silver bought African slaves, Asian spices. I told you about the Spanish piece of 8, that coin. It was basically international exchange. It was in Potosi, Bolivia. Actually became the largest city in the Americas with an estimated population of about 160,000. And this is where the largest silver mine was located. And The city's wealthy European elite lived in absolute luxury. Native American miners lived in horrid conditions. But women did find some new economic opportunities. So high in the Andes was the most important Spanish silver mine. Just a fabulously wealthy elite, a massively impoverished population of laborers. I mean, guys, the conditions were so bad in the mines that slaves were used, and locals who were drafted into the mines were given a funeral before they left home. And the impact of the mining industry was devastating to the local environment, caused pollution, deforestation, and flooding. But silver, nonetheless, vastly enriched the Spanish monarchy. That actually caused inflation because it wasn't real economic growth in Spain. The Spanish economy was traditionally, it had been too, it was so rigid before. And those Spanish aristocrats were against a big economic enterprise. And so Spain lost its dominance when the value of silver fell around 1600. Ironically, the Spanish discovery of a massive silver mine had a long-term damaging impact on Spain. The silver generated, like I said, inflation. Spanish production could not compete with imports. And, excuse me, furthermore, the Spanish elite, they were so aristocratic and disdainful of entrepreneurial activity, and Catholic fundamentalism did not welcome Jewish and Protestant merchants in the country. And so once the price of silver fell, Spain quickly lost its dominant role within Europe. Now, the Japanese government profited much more from silver production than did Spain. Excuse me. Tokugawa shoguns used their silver revenues to defeat their rivals and eventually unify the country. It worked with the merchant class to develop a market-based economy. And so heavy investment was placed in agriculture and industry. And they basically averted an ecological crisis and even limited their population growth. But China, silver further commercialized the country's economy. People need to sell something to obtain silver to pay their taxes, right? They had to pay their taxes in silver. So they needed to sell items to get that silver to pay those taxes. And the economy became regionally specialized. That means focused, right? Different regions, different areas focused on different things. And deforestation was a massively growing problem in China. It wasn't addressed like it was in Japan. And Europeans were essentially the middlemen in this world trade in silver. They funneled American silver to Asia, and Asian commodities took the market share from European products. So the influx of silver that caused inflation also destabilized many societies, leading to a general crisis from Europe all the way to Southeast Asia. Japan did a much better job, like I said, at managing the impact of silver than others. The military leaders used the silver, like I said, to win over the Civil War, unite the country. They established order. They also closed the borders, fostered alliances with merchants, and protected their remaining forests. They were able to hit that head on, their deforestation problem. The Japanese population took measures to even lower the birth rate. So that was the control of their population growth. And together, these moves really averted that ecological crisis, fostered a flourishing commercialized economy. And this actually laid the groundwork for the 19th century industrialization that was also to take place in Japan. And with the government demanding silver for taxes, I'll let you guys look at this map here while I'm finishing my thought. In China, the government's demanding silver for taxes. The Chinese population became increasingly entrepreneurial and commercialized. Many regions began to specialize their agriculture or craft production for export to a commercial economy. And this didn't happen in Spain, right? They were disdainful. They didn't like the idea of entrepreneurial activity and commercialization. But unfortunately in China, this economic dynamism took a heavy toll on the forest, and an impending ecological problem blocked further growth. Now, I know it's interesting to look at all these different arrows and where silver was going, right? In the global economy, Europeans could not outproduce their Asian rivals. Thus, the Spanish elite in the Americas bought Chinese silk for substantially cheaper than Spanish silk. And that happens, but they saved money doing it while not making money because they couldn't sell their Spanish silk, right? And the British consumers preferred less expensive Indian cottons to British textiles. So Asia, and more specifically China, was thus the center of this world system. So here in purple, you can see we have the Spanish land territory in the Americas. The French territory here in green, right? The English in brown and around the Hudson Bay there. The Dutch in orange. I forgot about Spanish territory here in the Caribbean as well. The Portuguese here in yellow, and Russian territory even along here in blue. And so you can see where it left Potosi and went on west to the Philippines, right? And here made its way all over, right? It also went to Europe and into Eurasia, right, where it was used predominantly here in Asia. And that's why so much of the world's silver supply ended up in Asia. Very interesting silver trade. Just like I said, the silver trade was incredible because it was just so much more important than the spice trade in creating this new global exchange network. And it really brought many countries together. I mean, the Spanish piece of 8 was international currency and was accepted everywhere. How different are things now, right? Okay, that is the end of section 2. The next section, I believe is, I think earlier I said the slave trade, but I think it's the fur trade, the fur hunt. So we've looked at first the Europeans and how they became involved in the Asian trade network and Asian commerce. We did talk a little bit about Europeans and the sugar trade, but for this particular chapter, we're focusing on the silver trade, the world hunt for fur, and the commerce and people, the Atlantic slave trade. All right, I'll see you guys for section 3.